Hello and welcome to the next episode of Tech Show with Daryoush. My name is Daryoush, your host, and our guests tonight are Kurt Roskopf and Babak. Tonight's show we talk mostly about the Linux, Linux as desktop, as a server, and for those who want to learn Linux, where to go and how to begin. Linux is known as a secure operating system, but actually, as I said in one of the previous sessions, it is secure when it is the operating system itself. When you try to install third-party softwares, it might not be secured anymore, and you will need to take the necessary precautions. In some distributions of the Linux, when you install it, firewall is not working, it's disabled, and you have to enable and configure the firewall so that it works properly and make your system secure. So many people try to use Linux as a replacement for the Windows or Mac, but some of them get frustrated how hard it is. It is not easy to use. We don't know how to begin, where to go. It depends, of course, to the distribution and release that they are using, they have selected. And also there are other issues related to Linux. Not all softwares are available in the download centers. Sometimes you need to download the software and install it from third-party websites. The format is tar.gz or we call tar.gz. And for these kind of files and programs or applications or scripts, you need to know Linux commands, how to extract, how to unzip the file, how to extract it. You need to compile it. Do you have the necessary compiler libraries? Have you installed the developer packages? Are they updated? Do you have all the necessary libraries and third-party softwares that are needed for the compiling of this software? So many times it has happened to me that when I wanted to install one program, I had to download and install at least 7 or 8 other libraries, install them, and then I was able to compile the original software that I wanted to use it. For the Linux itself, you need to be familiar with the coding and scripting and command line functions and commands. Some of the things you cannot do with the GUI interface, with the graphic user interfaces, like recompiling the Linux. Always you can find the latest version of the Linux as a source code, not as a predefined compiled file that you can download from the library of your Linux provider and install it. And those kernel updates are the general kernel updates, not as a kernel that has been compiled and configured for your own hardware. You can do that. And if you do that kind of work, that kind of compiling, the Linux source code for your own hardware, your performance will be different. But to do that, you need to have a good knowledge of Linux, the hardware that you are using. You need so many technical information, but how to do that? Where to start? All Linux distributions, if you install them completely, there are so many how-to files. These are the pure text files that provide full and complete information about how to set up and configure specific server on the Linux, how to configure, compile, and install, run, and manage Apache Web Server, DNS server, FTP server, the kernel itself, the network, firewall, everything. For everything, there is a how-to file with full information in details about how to do that. This is the point that you can start for learning Linux as an expert. After you read those files and scripts, then based on their distribution, which is RPM based or Debian based or TarGZ files, you need to go to the related groups and documents for that specific distribution. Read further information, further documents, and find the groups. And then, if you have any question, you can ask your questions in those groups and get an answer from the experts. Of course, most reliable distributions like Red Hat, Fedora, SUSE, Slackware, and Debian, or such kind of distributions, they have their own support groups. You can go there and ask your questions. Now, when we want to consider Linux as a replacement for Windows or Mac, there are so many softwares that we use, and now how can we find them? Is there any replacement for that or not? This is the first step before you try to decide that you can try Linux as a replacement for your business or work or not. Today, Babak is going to talk about a software which is very good example for a desktop publishing tool, which is called Scribus. Babak, please go on.
Thank you. Before that, I would like to add something to what you said. As a end user, I can say as an end user, I'm not an expert. I don't refer myself as an expert. I've been working with Mac for more than a decade now, and I use it a lot for everything, for graphics, for video editing. Sometimes I need that. So when I want to replace it, if I may say, with Linux, an end user usually do not see what experts see. They just want to open something and work with that. There are many difficulties in this respect. Yes, you're completely right. There were so many things I needed to know about this new world. Even from formatting the partition that I had problem with, which now is much easier. Choosing more friendly user, I may say, distribution is another subject. And there are other things. Uh, then it comes to how to find the application. That was another subject for itself. Uh, Again, as an end user, I've always looked for a publishing application, which I always used back in Windows or Mac, which was, well, I used to do that with InDesign or other applications on Mac also. Things were getting more and more complicated all the time, especially with InDesign. InDesign, year after year, update after update, it becomes more complicated. Menu in menu. It was sometimes really problem to do that, to make even a book. No, I'm not talking about a magazine, even a book. Apple Pages was much easier. It worked really good and really great. Well, better not to say great, but it was really good, enough to make a book or even a magazine. But lack of some functions always make us to go back to the application that we had problem to work with. Fortunately, as I have seen, open source applications are much active, or open source world, I can say, are much more active, and they are adding functions all the time, which is really interesting. Um, LibreOffice, for example, is very good in this respect. But again, lack of some functions was a little bit difficult for me when I wanted to check that, how to make a magazine or a book, not with like application like Publisher, Microsoft Publisher. Scribus was and is actually, I can say, one of the best applications that I could find in open source era, I can say. It's working really good with Vector. It's also with Pixel, but with Vector. Text boxes, connecting everything together, adding pictures or videos or other stuff. Still, it doesn't have that user interface that we see in, for example, InDesign or Publisher or Apple Pages or Affinity Publisher, but it really works good. I hope that really we can get someday that we can find a good designer, I may say, to find a better and more friendly user, user interface structure for that. Scribus is really good. I'm telling you, it's really good. But when I work with it, it reminds me back when I was working with Windows XP or even Windows 98. But it's fast. It is really fast. Maybe one of the reasons that it is fast is that it's not using that workspace area, that much graphics, everything that consumes energy sources and RAM especially, or power sources, everything. It's really fast. I tried to export a huge document to PDF, and it was just a heartbeat. It's just a snap. It did it. It just did it. So as long as it works, it works. That's great. Well, working in Linux is still, I'm trying to cope with it. However, I really am interested other people who are, watching this video, uh, comments anything that may support me and people like me to be able to increase our knowledge and experts in Linux and these kind of applications. For sure, there are many things. It is really difficult to find out. Even it is difficult to find a reliable Linux distro. Everyone have his own opinion about that. But I am really interested, and I'm willingly would like to read your comments in this respect, for me and for other people who wants to replace Mac or Windows and come to Linux distros. Back to you, Daryoush.
Daryoush, you're on mute. There we go. Let's hear you.
Thank you. Let me remind everyone that Linux was actually an operating system that has been designed to act as a server, not as a desktop computer. I'm using Linux since version 0.7, I think. No one had never heard of it. No one had not heard about it. And at that time, it was, I think, 15 floppy disk drives, mini disk drives, 3.5-inch floppy disks. It could not be run, unlike DOS, that you could run it from a floppy disk. You could not run Linux from the floppy disk. It needed to be installed on the hard drive. You needed to know vast knowledge about partitioning a Linux file system, and installing Linux next to a Windows partition was very tricky. And at that time, the only serious operating systems were Unix and OS2 from the IBM. DOS was something very new, and only on the desktop computers it was working. There was an SCO Unix at that time, which could run on the 386-piece computer PCs, but that computer needed to have a coprocessor and at least, I think, 2 megabytes of memory, which at that time it was too much because PCs had 640 kilobytes. And if you installed 1 megabyte memory, you say, oh, you have too much memory on your computer. And 4 megabyte, what are you going? Are you going to launch a shuttle? And at that time, Unix could not be running on the PCs. And Linux was a revolutionary Unix, which could run on any kind of computer from 386 above, and it did not need a coprocessor, which not all PCs had at that time coprocessor, and that was something very cool. And at that time, we could do so many things with Linux, but the graphic environment which was called X, and at that time it was XFCE. That was completely another story, another environment. No such softwares like LibreOffice or OpenOffice or anything was available. Most of the softwares that were available for the Linux were the server administration softwares. You could manage any kind of servers and network from a Linux computer connected to your network very, very easily. And then after Windows 95, some desktop environments was developed and released, and gradually other software development companies and developers started to offer to create software programs for the Linux for the desktop, and that was mostly for the administrators who needed to write a report or do something that was they instead of switching between the computers, do everything from one computer. And this is the story of the Linux. Originally, it has been a server operating system. And most of the softwares that started to develop for Linux were basically to help the network administrators, server admins, and these kind of people for the reporting and help them manage easier their servers. And now we have so many kind of softwares for the personal usage, as a desktop computer and as a server manager, server admins, server management, etc., server admins. So that's the story of the Linux from the very beginning, from the ancient time up to now that you see it today. And it has changed a lot, but I think it still needs time to be 100% intermediate user friend, to be user friendly for intermediate and average users, not for the professionals. If you are a professional, you can use Linux definitely as a replacement for Windows or Mac. You have everything you need, but for the desktop, for the average users, it needs time, and you need to learn so many commands. At least be familiar with them. I think Babak has something to add too. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I should say first that yes, you're right completely. But the point is that there are so many distros that currently they are doing really good job in making Linux available for end users as a desktop operating system. One of them was Zorin distro that I tested. It was really good and really fast and completely make for desktop, nothing as a server. Or there are so many other distros that are working for this. Some of them are actually, I feel like they are preparing to become like a new Apple, because they are making their own computers. It's really interesting. They are making their own computers and they use custom GNOME desktop or KDE desktop for their own computers, and they're doing good jobs actually. So I think they are this Linux system is moving really fast in this respect for people who wants to use it as a desktop, not as a server or as professional. But yes, you're completely right. There are still really long way to reach there. One of the most important things that I noticed was that, well, if I use Fedora, if I'm using Fedora, both GNOME and KDE on my laptop and my computer. But I tested other distros like this Zorin, like Elementary OS. The majority of them, because they are using these two desktops or other desktops like Cinnamon, for example, or like XFC, if you mentioned.
XFCE.
Yeah, they are desktops are all the same. Nothing is changed. Nobody find any difference when you use Zorin or you use other distros or even KDE. When we go through the system, then the changes appears itself themselves. I have serious problems with drivers, which with Fedora I do not have that kind of problem, but with others, yes, some of the drivers doesn't work correctly. I need to use. Well, that was another story. But I can see that they are working really good in this respect. These groups of developers, actually, they are actively working, and I appreciate what they do. Sorry, back to you again.
Thank you. Anyway, apart from when we talk about the Linux, please remember, Linux can be used as a secured operating system and as a secured server if you have not installed unnecessary tools and softwares. When you are going to use Linux as a server, you do not need KDE. You do not need OpenOffice, LibreOffice, or any other such kind of things. You only need the server softwares that are going to be needed on that server. If you need to have only a web server and you need to have a separate server for the emails or so-called mail server, do not install the mail server software on the web server. If you want to have them both running on the same server, then it's okay. If you want to install Linux as a firewall, you do not need to install unnecessary other softwares. Only install the required software, and each of them must be configured properly. Firewall must be configured properly. Unnecessary ports must be closed. Otherwise, if you install a software that is not needed and that software has a security hole, that security issue will endanger your whole server. It may cause so many other problems too. So consider the server, the operating system, as what you are going to do with it, and configure it for what you are planning to do with it. If it is going to be used as a desktop, do not use it as a server. If it is going to be used as a server, don't use it as a desktop. Not just as a server. When you install all unnecessary software, you are also using wasting actually some resources that can be saved and used to improve the performance of the server. And that is very important. Kurt, do you need anything to add or any comment?
Well, I guess I will take it that we're at the end of this episode. It's been a rich, full of insights and all of your expertise. I love to see the enthusiasm you both have in technology. It's not every day you get the high touch to go with the high tech. So great job, guys. I myself, I am not that versed in the Linux background of things. And so being a Linux novice, I really appreciate how you put it into usable terms. And I'm looking forward to our next episode. So I'll put it back to you, Daryoush, to button us up. And I think you want to get us out of here. I think we've done our episode, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Send your questions to questions@aranet.tech. We will definitely read your emails, ask your questions, and answer to your questions in the next episode. Thank you and have a blessed weekend.